Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Kerbal Space Program, where we're a little too big here for the Corgi, and we could go down on the size here and then run an adapter down here. This is not realistic. I've gone through and tried every engine on the list. They're all too small, including the Mammoth. So unfortunately for us, we have to either live with this, or we have to live with a smaller frame up here. And I think this would be the better way to go. So this would end up being this size, right? So we would end up having the S3, and we would probably go with the 128 here to approximately match this size and fuel volume. Approximately. It should be similar. So this is currently the S34 adapter tank, 2880 plus an additional 2880. That seems about right. Oh, that's the S4. Hang on. We wanted the S3 variant. So this is the S3, like 7200. It's going to be less fuel for sure. That's going to be 3240, and then that would fit in something like this, right? And then we'd have an adapter down here, and I just broke our, hang on, undo this. I think it was broken before, actually. Never mind. Okay, we're going to need to redo our strut work over here, but that's reasonably fine. So we could do something along the lines of this, right? This would be absolutely okay. I wish that this could be orange, but it can't. So then we would go take this down from a TD50 decoupler. This would end up being a TD37 decoupler, like this. And we could have that be orange. We could pretend that this is orange. And then we would have this be an adapter tank down here. So it'll be broadly the same amount of fuel, a little bit more in our first stage, a little bit less in our second stage, which does reduce our delta V, but I'm really not too concerned about delta V right now. Okay, where's our S3, S4 adapter? That should be this guy? Yes. So it ends up being something like this. Now, to be clear, this is not the way this is supposed to be set up necessarily. This is supposed to be set up so that this is straight the whole way down. Unfortunately, this is the way we're going to have to do it. There isn't a lot we can do about it. I think I do prefer this setup. So, at 0 altitude, we can see that stage 7 here has about 3,600 meters per second. That's a lot, no doubt about that. And then stage 5, which is where this Corgi fires. And this needs to be here. Stage 5 then is going to have about another 3,000 DV. Yeah, this is about the same amount of DV. So I feel like this flows better, even though it's slightly less close to the actual SLS design. I think that this looks better than what it was previously. So we're just going to, in parallel mode here, I'm going to grab these guys. I'm going to strut it in up here. And I'm also going to strut it here, just for stability purposes. Okay, and are we strutted down here? Yes, we are. That is connected. Okay, so I think we're ready to do our first test flight of the SLS. And I'm not going to use MechJeb at all for this. In fact, we might never use MechJeb for the Artemis program because we're going to be going on 0 inclination. That should be absolutely fine. So let's save this. I want to make sure we have no crew aboard and we can do our SLS test flight. Now, this is Artemis 1 specifically. So SLS Artemis 1. Okay. So there we go. We are ready to go on this. I do wish that this had some paint options. I would rather that this be pure white than this black and white and gray setup, but unfortunately, no options available there. That is something that would be fixed in KSP2. Same with this fairing. I wish that we could change the coloration of that. Unfortunately, we cannot. So for now, all we're going to do is we're going to do an uncrewed launch. And I'm going to change the parameters of Artemis 1, which is a historical flight at this point. Artemis 1 has happened. So I'm going to change the parameters of it a little bit because KSP doesn't model gravity in a quote-unquote correct manner. What this ends up meaning is that there are a lot of orbital tricks that are being used in these flights that we're not able to emulate. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to take this, we're going to enter orbit around the moon, possibly a retrograde orbit. Probably a retrograde orbit. Yeah, that's absolutely fine. We can do a retrograde. And then we're just going to orbit it and return home as a proof of the SLS. Let's double check our staging. So we fire our 4 main engines and our side engines. What is our thrust to weight here? 1.82? Okay, that seems pretty decent, actually. So 1.52 off the pad, slightly low. We don't need our ascent guidance. So then after that, we fire our second stage, and then after that, our Orion spacecraft module, which we could shorten this if we wanted to. I want to have the single engine there just because I like it, though. So that should be absolutely fine. This is then re-entry, and yeah, our staging looks good. So I'm going to turn SAS on. In fact, we'll just put this on kill rot, and we are going to lift this off. We need to head off to the moon. Throttling up helps. No doubt about that. So that's off to a good start. We wasted a tiny bit of fuel there, but I'm not concerned about it. This thing does have a lot of fuel. No doubt about that. We're up to 1.65 thrust to weight already. It should be absolutely fine. So we're going to go nearly straight up here until we hit probably an apoapsis of about 10 kilometers. Then we can start testing our pitch over. Or this is technically going to be a yaw over. That's absolutely fine. Cool. So we're building up some speed here. We've got about 53 seconds on the SRBs, and that's absolutely fine. So no problem whatsoever there. We've got about 4 meters per second of horizontal speed. We're going to want some more of that. So we're just going to bring this on over. We're going to be a little slow on that because we're looking to bring it over purely with gimbaling. And the question is, once those SRBs detach, how's that going to feel? For the time being, I'm just going to put this over at 45 degrees. Okay, we've still got about 20 seconds here. I'm keeping an eye on our apoapsis. I still want to get a little bit more altitude out of this. So I'm just going to park it here at 45 degrees for the moment until our SRBs burn out. And we're just going to push up our apoapsis, and then we're just going to want to head directly to the horizon, almost certainly. So 7, 6, 5, 4. Yeah, our apoapsis is looking good. 3, 2, 1, 0. Clean SRB detachment. And we're heading to the horizon. This maneuvers very, very, very well. We do see a little bit of wiggling once we get there. This is likely due to weakness in this structure. But this is a manageable amount of wiggling. Actually, I think it's weakness up here, now that I look at that. But we're just going to continue to burn here for a while. This is definitely ramping up the wiggling, and it is specifically here. Okay, we might have to do something about that joint, but this should be a manageable situation. We've still got about 45 seconds of burn left on this first stage. Yeah, there's definitely a weakness in the joints here and here. No doubt about that. But for the time being, this is acceptable-ish. Emphasis on the ish. Now that we're out of the atmosphere, it should get a little bit better. So our apoapsis is currently about 300 kilometers. 400? Okay, we can bring this up to about 500 and call it good. About there. Okay, excellent. At this point, I'm going to jettison our launch escape system. That is no longer necessary. We do not need our launch escape system. And we've still got about 608 meters per second here. So we're going to have to circularize. This is a pretty big orbit, and that's because we have a lot of power here. And that's absolutely fine. We're going to circularize this orbit about here or so. That's still only going to be 300 meters per second. Okay, we have so much delta V in this thing. So much delta V. We can go so much further than the moon. Okay, we'll align to this node. We should definitely remember to extend our solar panels. They're teeny tiny, but we should do it regardless. We are going to need the electric charge. No doubt about that. We can see our electric charge is actually going down right now. I'm wondering about antenna. We do have around the moon communication satellites, I think. Relay satellites, ways to bounce it off. I'm pretty sure. We might need a bigger antenna on this, but this is intended to be crewed. So I think that that should be relatively okay. How are we doing on electric charge right now? It is very, very slightly recharging. Okay, so that looks good. No problem there. And let's just get ourselves into this position. Cool. So once we get aligned for this burn, it's kind of insane how much fuel we have in this tank. We probably could reduce the amount of fuel, but I don't think we want to necessarily. So this will be absolutely fine. This will get us where we need to go, no doubt about that, with plenty of fuel left over. Plenty of fuel. To be honest, we don't need this second stage. That's for sure. But we're going to keep it around. We are certainly going to keep it around. We could ditch it. I'm thinking about ditching it now. I don't know. I kind of want to have it. We could just reduce the amount of fuel in this first stage. That is an option. Okay, so we're just going to get ourselves into orbit. The wiggling up here is certainly a problem. I don't expect that to be an issue once we ditch this first stage, which this is close enough, and I'm going to ditch it. We've got 300 meters per second left in it, but to be honest, we have so much delta V here. We've still got 6,000 meters per second after we ditch it. So let's go ahead and ditch it. And there we go. So now we're going to be on our second stage. We are getting rid of this. It only had 300 meters per second left. So we've got still over 6 kilometers per second here. Absolutely fine. No problem whatsoever there. So next up, we want to head off to the moon. And the moon is our target here. We can see we're off by about 0.3 degrees. That probably doesn't matter. I do want to bring this in a retrograde orbit. So we can start to think about a moon mission heading off around here. And we can then look at the moon and we can say, what direction would be retrograde? This is all prograde, I believe. So this is currently going to be prograde. If we want this to be retrograde, I think that we need to bring it around something along the lines of this. And this is going to be a decent amount of extra DV, but we don't actually care about that, right? So that's absolute... Hang on. That came back around to prograde. Okay, so we're going to have to change our timing on this a little bit. That's more like retrograde. Okay, so that'll be fine. We're actually, coincidentally, basically pointing right at this position. And I think 220 kilometers is fine. I don't have any particular height destination in mind here, so this seems okay. We can then warp to this burn, which will be in about 5 minutes. Looks good. Okay, and we can physics warp forward. Actually, we don't need to physics warp forward. We can just warp forward a bit. 30 seconds, 20, 10, and 3, 2, 1, 0, mark. And off we go with our very fancy-looking corgis. I actually really like this exhaust plume. I'm not sure I've ever used corgis before. That's really cool. I like that exhaust plume a lot. So we've got about 40 seconds left here. We are, of course, heading off to the moon in a retrograde orbit, and that is deliberate. We are specifically hitting a retrograde orbit here. And what's that going to do to our return trajectory? The way I usually return, I think, is predicated on being in a prograde orbit. We'll test that once we get there. So we just need to arrive, enter into an orbit it like a time or two, and then head back and proof the landing. So that is the overall concept behind Artemis 1. And that is something that has already happened. So we'll head on over. Of course, as I said, we're using a lot more DV than they did in reality, and we have access to a lot more DV than they do in reality. In reality, it's a lot spicier than this, but they're using a lot of fancy orbital tricks that simply don't work in KSP. Okay, so here we are in this position. We're going to want to add a retrograde burn here, and just circularize this up. So we're just entering into a, parking orbit in retrograde around the moon here. So that'll be fine, and we'll align to that node. And we'll arrive at the moon in a few hours here. It's been a while since we've been to the moon. No doubt about it. At this point in the timeline, it's been what, like 50 years? 55? 60? Somewhere in there. It's been a lot of years. We're going to warp on forward, and we'll load into the moon's sphere of influence shortly. About 3 hours until our retrograde burn. Beautiful. Now we're entering the moon's sphere of influence. We have so much delta V in this thing, it's insane. We might want to use this specifically as the refueler for the starship. Now that I think about it, we could get the starship here, refuel from, like, they rendezvous, refuel from this, then the starship undocks with the vehicle, lands back down here, comes back up, refuels here with this fuel, and then this all heads back, and then this burns up. That is something we could actually do. Interesting. We've got about 30 seconds left on this burn. That would necessitate a docking port up here. That is certainly something we can add. 3, 2, 1, 0, mark. Okay. That would also mean we could eliminate the fuel up here. I'm not sure we want to, necessarily. How much DV is it going to take to get us a decent return? With a retrograde orbit, we'll have to see. With a prograde orbit, it wouldn't take very much at all. Okay, so... Oh, we are in no probe control right now. Okay, so we are not connected, limited probe control. That is not shocking. We'll call this good. We can't actually do any maneuver nodes because we're control locked. So that is a reasonably fine, but from the perspective of mission control, we would have this like pre-planned, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to clear the input locker, and we're only going to work with the maneuver node, and I'm still not going to throttle up and down. We can't manually steer. We are going to need to steer using SAS, and we're going to need to only max and minimize our throttle because we don't have any actual connection here. So that is definitely noted. We're normally going to have crew, so this is probably not a problem. We could just slap an antenna onto it, though, and that's probably something we want to do. So I'm going to clear this specifically so that we can work with maneuvers. We can get rid of that. We can put ourselves on kill rot, and I'm going to try to do nothing except work with maneuvers here. So normally, if we were in a prograde orbit, what we would do is we would add a maneuver here and burn prograde. Actually, I think this would work. It'll just bring us in retrograde, wouldn't it? It'll bring us in retrograde on Kerbal, which is probably fine. Nope, that does not work. Okay, so we could try on this side. Yeah, it's just inverting what side of the moon we burn on. Okay, cool. So no problem whatsoever. We can return fairly cheaply by burning on the retrograde side. Or burning on the far side. So that sounds absolutely great. That means that we need to bring this down to somewhere around... I actually just want to put this at... We could put it at 70 kilometers, or we could just put it, like, somewhere around 10 kilometers and basically guarantee our return. That should do the trick. We're actually starting the burn now. I'm going to add in an orbit here. I'm going to add in 2 orbits. Yeah, actually just the 1 orbit. So this burn is going to now be in about 2 hours. We're going to have to change the timing on it because in that time, of course, the moon moves. So we need to burn about here because we'll be here in our orbit at that time. Okay, this is now actually going to be in about 3 hours. That's fine. We'll align to the node. No problem whatsoever there. I think carrying all this extra fuel does solve our starship refueling issue because we only need to get 1 starship out here. So this would dock up with the starship that's sitting in a parking orbit. The starship would do the landing, would return, would get refueled with whatever fuel it uses doing that, which shouldn't be a huge amount of fuel. Certainly, like, under 2 kilometers per second, I would expect. Way under. and then would return here, refuel, and then these would head home. That would be the overall concept. So let's warp on around and get ourselves our orbits done. This is going to be apparently a couple of orbits, but that's absolutely fine. Wonderful. Okay, so we're going to be burning prograde here, but on the far side of the moon. Looks good. 50 seconds, 40, 30, 20, 10, and 3, 2, 1, 0, mark. So, off we go, heading home. We're going to have to not throttle this up and down because we are technically input blocked right now. So that seems absolutely fine. Cool. We're going to call this close enough. 1.4 meters per second? Yeah, that's definitely close enough. We can't delete the maneuver node because we're control locked. Okay, that's fine. I guess the control lock came back. But we can see we've still got 5 kilometers per second. That is more than enough to refuel a Starship that landed and came back up. No doubt about that. So we have plenty of DV budget for that. I love it. Next, we're going to warp on forward, and we are going to head back to Kerbal. So at this point, we can jettison this. We no longer need this. I'm going to do that right now. And that'll put us on our spacecraft, right? But we're going to not need our spacecraft at this moment. So I'm going to jettison this. That's a lot of fuel going to go down the drain, but it will burn up in the atmosphere. And I'm also going to jettison this. Okay. And we're going to come back just with our spacecraft. We're going to go to surface velocity minus, although over the moon, it's not going to be very useful. So that fuel, we did throw away a lot on this flight. We will be utilizing a lot of that fuel, or some of the fuel anyway, to refuel Starship. Certainly all of the fuel in this stage if the Starship needs it. So that'll be absolutely fine. Hang on, we've got probe control now. Okay, beautiful. So I think what we're lacking there is communication satellites around the moon. But we do need to exit the moon's sphere of influence here, which we're doing right now. Fantastic. And we're now in Kerbal's sphere of influence. So we're going to head over to surface velocity minus, which this really isn't right now. Oh, we're in warp. Right. So we're going to head to surface velocity minus, and we're just going to warp our way on around. We're going to, of course, need to stow our photovoltaic panels. We'll do that about the same time we enter the atmosphere. Okay, we're very close here to entering atmosphere, so I'm going to retract these photovoltaic panels. A docking port here will be likely very necessary. And let's see how this landing goes. So we can see our periapsis height is actually 23 kilometers, so that must have happened because of ejecting the debris that we've created. But it should still be low enough that we'll aerobrake our way on through this without any problems. We are coming in pretty fast, no doubt about that. But we can see our apoapsis really dropping off here. Yeah, we're fine. We are absolutely fine. Oh, that's actually the KSC right there. That was not anticipated, but we're going to land right next to the KSC. Remarkable. Drogue's out. And main's out. I did not anticipate this. This is amazing. I love it. That was completely accidental. Didn't even look at it. Oh, if we can do that more, that would be amazing. But to be honest, it's not that beneficial, right? There's not that much money in this. So it's all fine. Drogues deploy, and mains will deploy shortly. And 7 meters per second. Looks great. I'm going to call this a relatively flawless test of the SLS. The major issues that were noted in this test are the wobbling in that first stage. I do want to address that. That could be a problem going forward. And more specifically, the bigger problems are the lack of docking port, which we can obviously fix. And beyond that, the lack of antenna, which is very fixable as well. So we'll recover that vessel. I'm going to call that a very successful Artemis 1 flight. And that seems great. That is, of course, not our final flight. Not even close. So next we're going to need to do the Artemis 2 flight. And then after that, we're going to need to get Starship made, and that'll be interesting. Very interesting. I'm not sure how we're going to do that. We're definitely not going to have 33 engines. That's for sure. But we'll recover those parts. It's not a lot of funds recovered, but we do get our stock payment of 200,000. There we go. And I want to hop into the VAB and make a couple of quick alterations here. So, specifically, what I want to do is I want to add in a little bit of strut work, and I want to add in the antenna and the docking port. So the docking port is going to end up going right up in here, and that is going to kind of be covered. But we'll just toss in the docking port there, and then the launch escape system will go on top of that. That might be a little bit wobbly. We could strut that, but I'm not too concerned about that wobbling, I don't think. Well, let's go ahead and strut it. So we'll strut this to be about... Oh, that didn't quite go the way I wanted it to. Let's just put it up inside here, and then strut that to about here or so, just keeping it as unobtrusive as possible, right? And then from here to about here, relatively unobtrusive, not hugely unobtrusive, but relatively so. And then something like this to hopefully add in a little bit of rigidity. This is not how it's actually made. The rocket is not actually this wobbly, but that's okay. From here, we're going to need to add in the third thing that we noticed that we were missing, which was communications. So all we need to do is add in a reasonable antenna here. We could do something like a Communitron HG55. This seems large. We could put that, like, here on the back or something. And then that would be something like this. I don't know. That seems a little too big. We could go with the HG61, which I think even has better antenna rating. The same antenna rating. And is definitely a little smaller. So that would end up going about like that. That feels better. So that way we have an antenna. Seems good. It does have to be radial. I would prefer it not be radial, but I guess this is going to be okay. And that should also hopefully address the rigidity here. So we're going to save this as the Artemis 2. And with that, it is time to put a cut in here. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. And next episode, we're going to do Artemis 2, which is a crude version of the one that we just did. Pretty much the same mission, but this time with crew on it. So that'll be fine, and then we're going to need to make Starship, which that's going to be a more extensive design process, because we're going to need... We're going to be making only the lunar variant of Starship, so we'll see how that ends up functioning. But that is definitely what we're going to be doing here shortly. You can leave your offerings to the engagement gods in the form of likes, comments, subscribes, and bell ringings, and a very special thank you to all of the channel members for making this video possible, including ALS Gamer, Shadow Wolf, Kentogan, Ali Lee, Upper Cumberland Gamers, Nick Smarty, Dimitri H, Punching the Microphone, Soccerman12UK, and all the rest. And of course, you. Thank you for watching. If you'd like to support the channel, you can click the join button down below the video, and as always, I will see you all next time.